I somehow get here. And it was misleading. You know, they're telling everyone there's a blizzard. I'm sure there'll be a blizzard. But, good. Now I can get in. So I'll just get in. What? Yeah, now you can do David, because I don't know if it's going to allow mine. All right, I don't know why I couldn't get in the system, but and Eddie was among the missing. So was Ryan to Blackboard Gurus. Okay, thank you very much. What did I have to do to get the whole screen? F4? F5. Okay. Good. All right. But you don't have to tell me you're not going to be here. I don't want you, though, to take unwarranted risks. Or if you have to take 3 buses to get here, I don't want you to do that. So, no, I'm here, regardless. But if the university says they're closed, no one's here. Now, you all can get in the system now, right? Yeah, okay, good. You all can get in the system. Just go to rutgers.edu, click on Newark, and they will have the weather report on the first page. If they're going to close in the morning, by 6 a.m., they will have the notice there. I can guarantee it always goes up at 6 a.m. If there's evening class canceled, they'll have it up by 3 p.m. And they're pretty loyal to that. So trust what it says. But I don't want you risking life and limb to get here. You do what you have to do. And again, if you can't get here, confer with one of your classmates. They can take for you anything that you would like. Can you see these slides? Is the lighting okay? No. Oh gosh. I like this. Okay? Yeah. Let's hope it stays. All right. We're going to move along at a fast clip today, but that never happens. We talked about where care is delivered last week. And know that care is moving into the community. Right now, only 50% of RNs work in hospitals. It's declining even more. It's very hard to get jobs in hospitals because hospitals want you to have prior experience, and if you can't get a job, how do you get the experience? That is not to make you worry. We've had no problems with Rutgers students getting jobs. It is the associate degree that have a big problem now. Most of the services are currently given in the community, and that's a much more difficult place to give care. because in the community, the client is in charge. So even if you tell them what to do or minister to them, it's all dependent on whether they want to listen. So know that. It's ironic. People think home care is so easy. There was a time when you had to have a baccalaureate degree to even get a job in home care. That has changed. There's a lot of chronic illness in home care. So home health aides who are certified by the state of New Jersey and by the Board of Nursing certifies them. They are placed in home care, but I often think that, and they are under the supervision of an RN, but the RN is at a distance, maybe in the agency's headquarters, so it's very difficult to supervise in the truest sense of the word. And I'm sure all of you have read or heard about some of the atrocities, home health aides taking advantage of elderly people, people who are not on top of every step, thievery, etc. It's not the usual, folks. Most people who work home care are very good people, and they are trained and certified before they go in. But today, let's talk about who the healthcare workers are. I'm assuming you looked at these slides. I have made some adjustments as late as last night, but they're not massive. Home healthcare workers are the largest growing sector of the American workforce. They are most of the healthcare workers are women, and most of them are in subservient, low-paying jobs. You are?
Yes.
What do you do?
I work HHA, home health care.
Oh, all right, as a home health caregiver.
Yes.
It's a good background to go into nursing, but you do know what I mean.
Yes.
And unions have targeted that population, the lowest population in healthcare, as a very fertile constituency to unionize because of this. Their working conditions are not always good, their pay is low, etc. The projections that we have are from the federal government. And I've often wondered, I know where they come from, but they're based on the past. And I don't think the future is really going to replicate the past. The projections are that healthcare workers' jobs will grow to 3 million by 2018. I don't know if the healthcare budget in this country is going to be able to stand this, even if this group is underpaid. All right? So I don't know what's going to happen. Right now, we're seeing more lesser educated people hired in hospitals, and many of the things that nurses used to do, down substituted, in other words, delegated to people who are trained to do very specific jobs and are paid less. Like, I was up at a hospital in Bergen County yesterday, and the nurses have brought to the union the issue of certain techniques being delegated to assistive personnel, like cardiograms. Now, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to do a cardiogram. Take my word for it. But you have to be very precise. However, if that's all you're doing, you can get very good at it. I don't mean to interpret the strips, but to put the leads on and do the technique. With the type of technology today, it's almost foolproof. Routine EKGs. But the union at this one hospital, on behalf of nurses, is fighting this because it will take away a part of the nursing role. If you calculate the number of hours invested in this, because every admission gets an EKG, an electrocardiogram, and some people have them done very frequently while they're in the hospital. They have a cardiac problem. But when you add up all the minutes and hours, it means you're going to lose some of the nurses, and you're going to make room for more assistive personnel. So that's how the labor issues feed into this. And I don't know if the labor force of healthcare workers is going to grow 3.2 million. These are statistics from 2 years ago. 2 years in today's environment is like 50 years. 50 years ago. So we don't know. But the way the people in this country use healthcare currently, it seems that the healthcare workforce will continue to grow. We mentioned this last week. Self-care has become almost a dirty word. Anyone has anything wrong with them, they run into the healthcare system to be seen by professionals. I do feel that one way to curtail the money we're investing in healthcare would be, to some degree, to return to a philosophy of self-care. And we mentioned that in Europe, many drugs are over the counter that aren't here. We have a very medicalized system. All right. The Commission on Accreditation of Allied Health Educational Program, CAHEP, accredits 1,900 allied health programs in 18 disciplines. CAHEP is the largest accreditor of healthcare workers. And CAHEP was established by the American Medical Association years ago, and then it broke off to be freestanding, so it's a freestanding entity now. But CAHEP accreditation is required for most programs. Respiratory therapists, occupational therapists. The only things that have been kept by nursing are home health aides, certified nursing assistants, titles that clearly are linked to nursing. And nursing is the largest group among healthcare workers. There are 2.9 million registered nurses as of a few months ago, and 2.6 million jobs. Now, how come there are more workers than jobs? Because some people retire but never give up their license. I talk to people I know that are older, who have retired. I always ask them, I don't know why, but did you keep your license? And I am shocked to death when some tell me no. What's the sense in keeping it? I'm not working. They would have to jump me out in the hall for me to give up my license. Yes, you have to do things to keep it. There are continuing education units, and we'll talk about that later. But regardless, when you get that license, talk to the seniors. Some of them, they're going through the HESI now, and it's a torture to get it, so you don't give it up so easily. Once you have the license, it's yours for life if you do the continuing education that's required. But nursing is the largest cohort in healthcare, and I often wonder why we don't have more clout. And we'll discuss that later too. But there are other retired nurses. There are, because we have been, although that is changing, we always have been a predominantly women's profession. You have women taking a hiatus from work due to childbearing, although that has changed too. Not many women take that time totally without work anymore. But there are less jobs than there are registered nurses. There are 2.9 million. All right, let's look at the healthcare workers very quickly. There are two levels of healthcare workers. There are technologists and technicians. Technologists have the full scope of practice. They can do everything that occupational area prepares you to do. Or, no, that should be restated. They can do everything which in the law belongs to that occupational area. Technicians can't. Technicians assist the technologists. So, if this applies to nursing, then the RN has the full scope, is the technologist, and the technician is the LPN, the nursing assistant, etc. And this works in every field. As professions grow, they become more specialized and require more education. That's a systems principle, and nowhere better to mention it than at Rutgers, because Rutgers has always been based, since the beginning of its educational programs, on systems theory. It is not based on one nursing theory, which you'll know next week. We'll get into the nursing theories. It's based on a lot of different nursing theories, but it's heavily based on systems theory. And these are systems principles. As a field of work ages and matures, it becomes more specialized. And assistants are created to help the worker who has the full scope of practice to do their work. So let's look at some examples of that. No, stay here. All right, pharmacists and physiotherapists, occupational therapists, all have moved to the doctoral level. And the program in physiotherapy at Rutgers is based in Camden. It moved to the doctoral level a long time ago. Well, not an eon ago, but maybe 10, 15 years ago. Pharmacy. The degree used to be a bachelor's in pharmacy. It is now a PharmD. Rutgers pharmacy program is world-renowned, and it moved to the PharmD again many years ago. It used to give the bachelor's in pharmacy. That's gone. It's now the PharmD in order to be a pharmacist. And then there are specialties within pharmacy which go beyond that. There's clinical pharmacy. Clinical pharmacy, which is a subspecialty within pharmacy, are pharmacists that consult on drugs administered to patients. And I've seen it dozens of times. Let's take an elderly person. Elderly people in this country, unfortunately, are overdrugged. It's called polypharmacy. An excellent topic to write about, by the way. And you would go and look. You'd put in polypharmacy, and it would show you the statistics. All right? But many times you have an elderly person who appears cognitively disabled, who is incontinent, and you call in a clinical pharmacist. They look at the list of drugs they're taking, and they immediately say, get them off that, substitute this, or frequently I've seen them come in, a patient that's on 10 different drugs, which is nothing. And they'll come in and say, take them off all this crap and see what happens. And we'll start from scratch. And you'll wind up having the patient on one or two things that they really need for their heart or blood pressure, etc. So clinical pharmacists are invaluable, and that's a subspecialty of pharmacy. Physiotherapists too. I mentioned that they're prepared at the doctoral level. Occupational therapists are prepared now at the doctoral level. And how come they can move so quickly and we have trouble even moving to the bachelor's degree? All right? Because they're small cohorts of people. They're not 2.9 million. They're smaller cohorts. And usually there's a close association with their professional organizations, and they can move things more quickly. Now, nursing has moved to the doctoral level, hypothetically. Rutgers is one of 300 schools now that has a doctor of nursing practice, and we'll talk about that when we get to education, the DNP. It's highly specialized. You have to decide what clinical population you want to work with, but it is a bona fide doctorate, and that's our terminal degree for practice. Is it recognized? Yes, it's recognized by hospitals like the Magnets. It's quickly taking root, but it's a specialization. As we grow, we specialize. It's a technologist that works with assistants, and the RN would be an assistant to the DNP. But patients in general have become much more ill and much more cared for in the community, so those two factors have driven the need for a doctorate in nursing. Let's look at some of the other health workers, and this might be redundant to many of you. A chiropractor deals with adjustments, physiotherapeutic things, counseling, education, adjustments. The chiropractic field, and they call it chiropractic, that's what they call it, feels that most of your problems, health problems, come from maladjustments of the musculoskeletal system. So their treatment is adjustment. Now, can I vouch for using chiropractors? No, but I know a lot of people who have been dramatically helped by them. Quite frankly, it has as much credibility for me as going to an MD. People go to an MD like my father used to say, the best doctor is the one who cures you. He's right. They go to one doctor, they're not cured, they shop around. Chiropractic is a different approach. The Chiropractic Association in this state, I've worked with them through the Nurses Association. They're very quick to refer you out. In other words, they do an assessment, they decide if they can help. If they can't help, they're very ready to refer you out. It's not that they keep the patient, which a lot of other disciplines do. Stay with your doctor. No, if they feel they can't help you, they refer you out. Rutgers has a chiropractic school in Camden too, I think. And the biggest one that I know of is in New York, out on Long Island. You can read a little bit more about them in your book. A bachelor's degree is required in some, not in all, chiropractic schools. All right, clinical laboratory, and here we see technicians and technologists. The clinical laboratory technologist works in the full scope, does everything that a clinical laboratory person does within reason, because the clinical laboratory work has also become very specialized. For instance, If you have a baby in New Jersey now, we're one of, I think, 6 states that requires genetic testing at birth. Again, remember I told you last week you can be very proud of this state? This state has suffered a lot of nastiness from people, jokes, but we have done an awful lot. All right, every baby in New Jersey, and you wouldn't even know if you're the mother, but they go through genetic testing at birth. The genetic testing is merely, it's not specific, it's merely a broad diagnostic thing that will show up if there is some genetic suspicion. If there's genetic suspicion, the child and the parents are referred to a genetic center. There's one over at UMDNJ. Maybe it'll be here next time, but it's over at UMDNJ right now. There's one at Columbia in New York that is phenomenal, and you would take the baby there, and they would take a sample and do specific tests. The tests required in New Jersey are what are called screening tests. Screening tests. They just say, oh, something's going on here. You better take your baby and have more specialized tests done. And I'm sure the clinical laboratory technologists who perform those tests are specialists. All right? So they've gone beyond being broad-based technologists into specialist technology. Dentists are another example. There's dentistry, there's dental hygienists, and there's dental technicians, and there's assistants to the technicians. Dentists who want to run their practice to make more in receipts over disbursements or make a profit have to use lower paid people to do certain things. And it's not being a money monger. I go to a dentist. I've known him for years. I've gone to 3 in my life. Yeah. And the 3 in my life that I've gone to never had any assistants. This one has 1 assistant. And because I know him better than I knew the ones that I went to as a young person, I say to him, why don't you hire someone to do A, B, and C? And he looks at me and says, listen, it's not going to be many years before I retire. I don't want to break anybody in. All right, a valid reason. But people who are starting out today use technicians and technologists widely. Dietitians. There are dietitians who are into hotel-type dietetics. There are general dietitians and there are therapeutic dietitians. If you go to work with an agency that offers dietetic services, and they all have to, by law in this state, they have to have a dietitian on staff. But I would want to know, maybe not when I'm applying for a job, first thing when I go to human resources, but after I'm there and I see a need to refer patients, I want to know, are you a specialty dietitian? Are you a therapeutic dietitian? Or are you a general dietitian? Or are you a hotel type? And these are majors in schools of dietetics. And the terminal degree is the doctorate today. So, interesting. There are some places, like Valley Hospital in Ridgewood. They have many buildings they've bought in the general vicinity, and one is the Lukow Pavilion. It's next to the Fashion Center. Any of you know Paramus in that area? All right. It's next to the Fashion Center, and they have a full dietetic staff. I doubt that they're all on full-time, because these people, like nurses, work probably several jobs. But they have specialty dietitians in diabetes, because I referred people there, in gluten sensitivity. You know what that is? Gluten, one of the biggest things around today. Everyone's on gluten, I call them, you know, everybody. And there was a big article in the New York Times on Sunday about people who aren't in celiac disease. That's the disease name. Celiac disease is a sensitivity to products with gluten in them. What's gluten? How many of you know this? I don't want to rag on about something. No. All right. Gluten is primarily contained in bread, pasta, and beer. Those are the big offenders. But if you have celiac disease, you read labels. And it's not just wheat bread. It's wheat, it's oats, it's rye. Corn is the only bread that you can have. And it has to be made without any of the other byproducts. It even has to be made without touching the machines that made wheat bread or rye bread. It's a very specialized area of dietetics to teach these people about this. So they have many dietitians. They have dietitians who are specialists in cardiac functions and blood pressure control. You'd be surprised what havoc diet can wreak. So, and I don't want to make you obsessive. My one daughter, she's coming down today from Connecticut because, and took off from work because she doesn't want to be stranded in 3 feet of snow. That's what they're predicting up there. And she says to me on the phone last night, now make sure you have a lot of green vegetables and this and that. And I said, you're coming as a guest. Why should I go out? And because I'm on a new diet. Now, I don't know if this is a therapeutic diet or it's, because she's skinny, so I doubt it's to lose weight, but she's on some type of a new diet she got from a dietitian. So, God knows, I hope it's nothing fatal. You know? Health educators are another category of healthcare worker, and not so many years ago, nurses did all the health education. Are you following me? We've given off piece by piece things we used to do. Now, for some patients, that's okay because people are sicker today when they get in the healthcare system. And our knowledge is much greater today. So some of it is good. But years ago, we were the dietitians, we were the health educators, we were the respiratory therapists, because I can remember, and it's not 100 years ago when I worked in a hospital, and I did that for many years. I can remember the nurse had to go down in the basement to get the oxygen tank and brought it up to the patient and was responsible for intermittent positive pressure therapy, IPPV therapy. That's when a person can't breathe deeply enough to expand their lungs, and oxygen is given with some force. Nurses were responsible for helium therapy, did everything that today respiratory therapists do. Medical records administration is not just filing charts. It's a very high-paid job today. Medical records includes transcriptionists, which is more or less like a court reporter almost. But it also includes billing people. And on my computer last night came an ad for a master's program through Sacred Heart University. They've gone digital too. They're in Providence, Rhode Island. They're offering a master's degree in IT for healthcare, medical transcriptionists and billers. There is a talent to billing. Remember last week we talked about the DRGs, remember? And the case mix, you probably all forgot, but that's why I continue to repeat myself. We said that since 1986, the federal government has mandated case mix for all healthcare services. That there's one overall fee that is given to a hospital for a Medicare patient, and it's based on certain specific indicators like their diagnosis, whether they had complications, whether they have procedures done that are extraordinary, and each one of those carries a different number, and there's a different price attached to it. So the medical records people are invaluable. Let me tell you a story. Some years ago, and I've been into this stuff, this billing stuff, for a lot of years. I was called by our colleagues at University Hospital, specifically the supervisor in OB. She just had a meeting with the hospital administration, and OB was going under. In other words, University Hospital doesn't make enough to clear its expenses. We know that. It's heavily subsidized by the state, but there had been even greater loss. And she was wondering if I could come over and look at their charts and see with her, talk about what possibly was going wrong. To make a long story short, I went over, and 90% or 80% of their discharges were classified as normal spontaneous delivery or a C-section with no complications. All right? You lose money, people. If there's a problem, you better document it. So what we found, the chart review we did, almost 90% of the people were there because they had big problems. They were not normal spontaneous delivery. They were toxemia linked in it. They were sections done not in the normal course of events because of misproportions, which is common. The pelvis, the baby won't get through. It was because of other serious conditions, but they weren't taking credit. The doctors would just put, when they discharge, NSD and sign off on the chart. The biller would see NSD, and NSD is number 367, put it through to the government with that number, and they get this measly reimbursement. They quadrupled their reimbursement overnight by categorizing the situations correctly, and in response to that, they hired someone with before they were offering master's degrees, they were offering special programs, non-degree, but programs for these people. They found when they got a specialist in, the reimbursement zoomed up. And they took the discharge note out of the hands of the physicians and put it in the hands of the nurses who did it for the physicians, all right? Because they found that the nurses knew the patients, and the primary nurse could document very specifically what the condition was, and that gave the proper information to the billers who were prepared for this type of thing, and they could move forward. So there's a big future in medical records administration, and that's a subset of IT if you're interested. All right, medicine. You will dealing mostly with nurses, secondarily with medicine. Now, let me make a remark here that we're going to talk about in the 11th week, I guess. Nurses are responsible for their own actions. This has been proven by declaratory decision, court decision after court decision. Years ago, the nurse could get out of a tough situation by saying, the doctor made me do it. You understand? They perceived the doctor as superior, so they deferred, even if something was ordered that they knew, and this is years ago, that they knew was illogical. They may question it, but if the doctor said, that's what I want, they gave it. Mistake. Many court decisions now say the nurse is responsible for the knowledge in this and that area. Pharmacy is a big one. And therefore, if something goes wrong, the person who gave it, the buck stops there. There may be some co-responsibility, but it's the nurse usually that is responsible. And I'll tell you, it's a frightening thing, but my heart soars to hear this. Because nurses for too long have been passing the buck on to someone else. In other words, if, a psychiatrist comes in and she orders 3,000 units of Thorazine for a patient. If you're working in psychiatry, you should know 3,000 units might kill someone on another unit. But for a severely affected psychiatric patient, it's nothing. And you might have more faith in a physician that's been prepared in psychiatry. Some other person comes in and orders that. You might say, doctor, my experience is that that's too much. Give it. I feel uneasy with that prescription. If you want it, you give it. And I will chart that I refuse to give it, and you'll have to. Now, all behaviors like that make ripples. And hospitals don't like ripples. But you're there to protect the patient. So you will be working most closely with allopathic physicians. And you will be working very closely with APNs, advanced practice nurses. And advanced practice nurses have the right to prescribe medication if they have a joint protocol with a physician. So you will also take orders from APNs. You can take orders. That's one of the issues which is currently in dispute in this state. We're this much away from having the requirement for a joint protocol carved out of the law. All right? So, in medicine, there are really two major branches, allopaths and osteopaths. 5% of physicians nationwide are osteopaths. The rest are allopaths, MDs, medical doctors, versus DOs, doctors of osteopathy. New Jersey is one of the states that has a high incidence of DOs. I don't know why. Rutgers has a School of Osteopathy in Camden. What's my opinion of osteopaths? I think they're wonderful. The other place there's a high aggregate number of osteopaths is the Midwest, around Iowa, Utah, Nebraska, in the Midwest. What's the difference in education? There is none, except osteopaths are educated for primary care. Now, osteopaths have the same opportunities as allopaths. They can compete for the same residencies, the same specialty practice, and many of them want to be specialists, but they're educated to be primary care physicians. And in most osteopathic medical schools that I know of, there is a year devoted to primary care practice. I have a nephew that went through school in Des Moines, Iowa, and he had a year that he worked with an osteopath on an Indian reservation out there, doing primary care. And he's doing primary care now. So most osteopaths focus in on primary care, and there are 25 schools nationally, that's all. There are 129 allopathic schools, medical schools, MD schools. And since 2009, there's been an equal gender split in medicine, men and women, in school. I don't mean among practicing, that's another issue, but in schools, it's half and half today. In order to specialize after the first professional degree, which is the MD and the DO, it takes 2 to 7 years to finish a specialization. And the most sued specialization is orthopedics. The most sued specialization from the National Practitioners Database, from official sources, as of last year, is orthopedics. Then the second most frequently sued is neurosurgery. And I don't know if equal to them, a little bit more, or under them, OBGYN, big time. Everybody expects a perfect baby when they're pregnant, you know. Perfect, look perfect, act perfect. So there's major suits, and a lot of the suits stem back to genetic testing. People who have genetic testing are assured the baby is fine, there's been a screw-up in the lab, and a developmentally disabled child is born that should have been picked up in genetic testing. Major suits around it. Post-residency, and you know there's no more internship. People finish medical school and go into a residency. We're playing with words here. They're still learning. And physicians start to touch patients during like their second year of medical school, second or third year. And their mentors are the senior nurses. Talk to any doctor. Their mentors are the nurses. You don't think there's going to be a physician there all the time guiding them along. It's the senior nurses. They quickly learn. They're the people that know the ropes. After a residency, a physician becomes a fellow, and that's when they learn their specialty practice. A fellow in cardiology or in neurosurgery. And they learn their field at the knees of a mentor, just the way they did 200 years ago. They learn it by doing, they learn it by working with the best, I hope. There was something, I think it was on the 11 o'clock news last night, about simulation being used for neurosurgery. We use simulation here a lot, and you're going to be learning. In other words, we have dummies that are computerized, and they even speak to you. And you can get away with much more with a real patient because these dummies are smart. If you're assigned to a dummy and they have a heart attack and you don't resuscitate them in time or call for the resuscitation team, they say to you, I'm dead, and that's it. You can't resuscitate them anymore. But we have very sophisticated dummies, and all of a sudden medicine has discovered the dummy. I thought they should give nursing at least equal time. But anyway, they had a special on neurosurgeons, and this tape was done at Columbia Presbyterian in New York, are learning to do craniosurgery through simulation. They've perfected that the simulation device exactly feels like brain tissue. When you put the instruments on the screen to begin to touch, it's very lifelike. And that's how student fellows who are physicians are beginning to learn their specialty, not going in and experimenting on a real person first. So it gave me a lot of hope. PhDs who are going to do research are not prepared. MDs who are going to do research are not prepared. You have to have the PhD. Among academic circles, like the doctorates in physics and in sociology, university professors, doctors are seen as uneducated folk. All right? They're looked down on. They're not seen as educated enough to educate the young. So there's a real bias. So if physicians are going to do any research, they have to go for a PhD on top of the MD in most institutions. I wouldn't say there aren't MDs over at UMD and that have done wonderful things that don't have the PhD, but that's the usual requirement. Any questions about medicine? No? Okay. Let's go to the PA. You'll be working with PAs. They are wonderful allies and co-workers. They're often compared with the APN, the Advanced Practice Nurse. There's nothing like a PA in an APN, or there shouldn't be. You will find some APNs who have never been exposed to enough nursing sounding like a PA, and it just makes me shudder. I have a job I was trying to fill for an APN. This is a physician in Bergen County and his physician daughter, an older physician, his daughter. He wants to retire soon, so I've convinced them to look at APNs to bring into the practice. They brought one in that I found, and she was such a success. She's unbelievable. They want another one. So I've been sort of, and I don't get paid for it. Don't look, I'm not an employment agency, but I've been interviewing some people as I find them. And I find some APNs that feel they're junior physicians. I don't want them. Nursing is totally different. And we talked about some of the things through the last weeks. Nurses are holistic. They see problems as opportunities, not as negatives usually. They believe in self-care and advocacy for their patients. They're wholly different than physicians. But I believe when I need a physician, I know when I need a physician. And they're the best things for illness, not for health. So another important thing about the PA works dependently. And go on Google, or I think the website might be on the syllabi, the Physicians Assistants Association. They have a wonderful website, and they have a paper there that describes their practice. They're dependent. They own, and in this state, They may only work under the supervision, every piece of their practice is under the supervision of a physician, although now the physician doesn't have to be at their elbow. Until a few years ago, and it's the nursing organization that kept them in that functional status, and they know it. So they made friends with us, and we laid back. Now they can operate at a distance, but every speck of their practice is dependent, versus the APA has to have a joint protocol with a physician that is reviewed maybe once a year. All right. And what it does, it's only for prescription of medication that we're not totally independent. It talks about, like it may say that I'm going to use this source for my drugs. I'm going to use the Merck desk manual to select my drugs. That's as loose as it is. Not with the PAs. Their actual prescriptive authority and everything they prescribe is dependent on a physician's say-so. They provide diagnostic and therapeutic care, and in most cases, they can now prescribe, and the physician doesn't have to be right on the premises with them. But they all started having the physician on the premises, and most programs are at the master's level. We have one at Rutgers. You see, you have everything at Rutgers. It's on Cook campus. Cook campus is the campus for innovation. Environmental science started there. The PA started there. And when you finish PA school, you have to become certified by CAHEP. Remember? CAHEP, the Accreditors for Allied Health. It's interesting that in their webpage, on their organizational webpage, they say they have no need for greater autonomy. They really say that. Well, they say they're dependent on the physician. They exist to facilitate the practice of the physician. That's what they say. I'm suspicious because no group comes into existence and then doesn't eventually want to rise, to have more control, more revenue generating potential, more autonomy. They've taken a long time, but as nurses, APNs become more and more in charge of their practice. I'm wondering if they're not going to start to question, should we be independent? And in the ACA, in the Affordable Care Act, the Obamacare, it speaks about PAs, it speaks about alternate providers, or mid-level providers. Those are two words used for APNs and PAs. Mid-level providers, alternates to what? To physicians. All right? Because it's very clear you couldn't have enough to supply particularly all the primary care that you're promising in that bill, unless you institute self-care. Yeah.
Can you describe the difference between the allopath and osteopathy?
Oh, the allopath and the osteopath? They have the exact same education. They have the same prescriptive rights and compete for the same residencies. But osteopaths, their primary theory is that very much in a way like the chiropractor, that all medical problems derive from lack of synergy between the systems of the body. So forget what I said about chiropractors, because that's going to confuse you. It's synergy between systems of the body that creates wellness. Now that was their original dictum. Since then, they teach exactly like allopathic, And I guess why there are more in some areas than others is because they're mostly primary care. Absolutely, most of them go into primary care. Their presence in the Midwest, talking to some of the physicians I know out there, older physicians, they claim their dominance in the Midwest has come from the presence of Indian reservations, where there's a need for primary care, where when there's really a serious problem, the people are transported to the Indian Health Service hospitals, but the need on site is dramatically for primary care, and they're schooled to do that. All right? In 2010, there were 140 accredited programs for the PA, and that has burgeoned in recent years. As I said, we have one in Cook College. Rutgers has one. And for years, there was a very bitter fight between the Nurses Association in this state and the PA interests. We did not want them at all. And it took them a good 10 years of lobbying to even become to practice legally in this state. We didn't want them. We thought that nurses offer more, have more independence, and could do the same job without being under the supervision of doctors. Some other healthcare workers, EMTs, and I have some in the room, I think, right? And there are two levels, the ACE and the paramedics. The paramedics have a broader scope of practice. What are you? Wait, you're a
I'm EMT.
Okay, what level?
Basic.
What?
Basic.
The highest level?
No, look.
The lower level. What can't you do?
I can't start IVs.
Okay.
I can't do any meds.
Can't give meds or start IVs.
Right.
So you can only give emergency care. Okay. Can you take teleorders from a hospital, from a physician? No. The paramedics can. They can take via distance systems orders from a hospital, from an APN sometimes, or from an MD, how to treat the patient and do that in their absence. We talked about pharmacists, podiatrists, big area today. Podiatrists. Foot doctor. I don't know anybody over 65 that doesn't have problems with their feet. The biggest complaint when you go into nursing homes or facilities for the aged are the feet. And a complaint from beauticians, get this, which makes sense. A diabetic or cardiac, anyone with a health problem can go to a podiatrist and they'll charge $35 to Medicare to have their feet done, versus you can go have a pedicure for $10 or less sometimes, right? And so this, and quite frankly, from what I've seen, many of them do a better job, and they are very angry over that. What does that stem from? It stems from the fact that people with circulatory problems, if their feet aren't taken care of properly and they break down with fissures, little cuts in the feet, or if they cut their own nails and make a mistake and cut part of the skin, they're in big danger for having infections, and that runs into gangrene. All right, rehabilitative services. We talked about these before, and all of these have risen to the doctoral level, all of them. Same thing with radiological technologists and technicians. there are 2, 3, 4 year programs. Most community colleges have a radiology program. They're very good, but usually they're technicians. Respiratory therapists, social workers, vision care, an interesting thing. Ophthalmologist is an MD with a specialty in eyes. What's an optometrist? Come on, please talk. I reviewed somebody. I went into a class yesterday to observe someone. Nobody talked. I wrote the professor up, so please. Yes?
Basically, an optometrist is a doctor, but he can't do surgery like an ophthalmologist can. He can prescribe meds, he can give you contact lenses, glasses, but an MD more focuses on an ophthalmologist on surgery.
Okay, you're right. There are certain therapeutics he can't do. But the crux of it all, optometrists are committed to high-level wellness for the eyes. They want you to achieve the best vision that you possibly can. An ophthalmologist will do that through glasses, through surgery sometimes, through medication, maybe because they can prescribe it. An optometrist will do it through eye training. Fascinating field. And I've had 4 kids who went to an optometrist. No drugs, no nothing. It's working with the eye in exercise to improve the acuity, and it works. There are optometrists in California who claim they found a way to treat autism through optometry therapeutics. Fascinating. If you want to go look it up, it's at UCLA. All the research has been done. They have hired 2 optometrists for the state of California who see all the autistic kids and institute a program of therapy. All right, what's at the heart of this? They feel that kids who are autistic, and I'm not qualified to teach you about autism, but autism is one of the diseases, and you'll learn about it, that has 1 million etiologies claimed. Dietary, this is one of the etiologies. The Optometric Association in California, through its research, which has been credible research, claims that autistic kids are bombarded with stimuli. So there's anything that happens around them, it's attended to. They can't focus. So the optometric therapy consists of the kid wearing a helmet just for the treatment, with blinders on the side. I've seen the treatment. And having them focus on a chart and talk about what they see to the therapist or the technician. There have been technicians trained to do this, this therapy. Now, they have proven cases where their therapy has worked absolute wonders. And there have others it's done nothing for. But it's another point on the autistic spectrum of treatment to look into. There have been a lot of claims, dietary, vitamins, behavioral therapy cognitive behavioral therapy is what's professed from Columbia, and there are 3 schools in northern New Jersey that are based on that therapy, but another is done by optometrists or their technicians to focus attention and to teach the client how to keep their attention focused and to dismiss all peripheral stimuli. And it's worked for some kids. And opticians fill eyeglass prescriptions, just as the local drugstore does, right, or Christmas tree shop. All right, so quickly, let's look at predictions about healthcare as we move forward into this Millennium War. Hospitals will continue to shrink, essentially becoming big intensive care units. Yes. If you're an elderly person and you're in the hospital for more than X number of days, and your DRG was one of a class, the federal government won't pay for you anymore because you should have been progressing care. All of these quality controls have been put into place and more are coming. Now, if you're discharged and on Medicare and you're readmitted within a certain number of days, the government will not pay for you. Why?